describing what you see in terms of how to support these kids in class when you've got them in your class. And we're going to, do kind of be carefully descriptive in what we're seeing with them. The next step in it is to figure out what possible reasons they might have for doing the behaviors that they're doing, whether it is sitting there quietly or acting out in some way. We need to make sure that we really know them and that we're aware of any underlying issues, or we suspect some underlying issues. So we're gonna look at their comprehension and see and kind of check into, do they understand what it is that we're expecting of them? We're going to look at their processing speed and think, can they respond if I give them enough time? And then we're going to, of course, examine the executive functioning pieces and look through all those. These are just kind of examples. Sometimes it would be a good idea, too, to make yourself up a checklist of things to look for. When you're questioning a student, how a student is learning and what their brain might look at, like, make up your own checklist of things that you can kind of watch for in the class. For me to make I can make checklists for teachers, but I'm not always sure, because I'm not a teacher, what you guys are able to do in front of the classroom when you can see, like you've got 20, 30 kids in there, what can you see? What can you realistically see? It's just, a lot of it is just kind of being aware. Watch for a lot of anxiety. Anxiety can cause a lot of different things in kids. Sensory issues. One girl that we had who turned out to have a diagnosis of autism later, she was assessed twice before they diagnosed her, and to me the initial diagnoses that she was given about 7 different diagnoses, and all of those diagnoses were features of autism: sensory integration disorder, OCD, I can't remember them all, but they all added up to autism. So why did they just diagnose her with autism in the first place? I don't know. Anyway, she was diagnosed. And one of her sensory issues came out when her mom, when she was escalated because her mom hadn't had forgotten to give her a lunch. While waiting for her mom, she licked the front door of the school for 2 hours. For some reason, that was soothing to her. It wasn't okay, it wasn't appropriate, but there was something about, she was getting some soothing feel out of that. She's also a girl, her sensory issues are so pronounced that she can't wear pants. She always has to wear a skirt, and her mom has got her to wear long skirts because she initially didn't like anything around her legs, so the skirts were shorter. Well, now they're longer, so it covers up more. But it's hard. It's hard to have those sensory issues. She also can't pick up a pen right now. She stopped being able to pick up any sort of writing tool, so she's doing things on the iPad, on the touchscreen. And she's extremely bright. She's making straight A's virtually in her high school subjects. She also, I know her tactile sensitivity. I know her issues. She knows me quite well. And I was in there one day, and she was talking about her brother, who looks like he's probably on the spectrum too. And I said, I'm concerned about him too. And she did this. And I said, what are you doing? And she said, I'm hugging you. And I said, oh, that's nice. I said, can I get a real hug? And she said, yes. And she's got all these tactile issues, and she let me hug her for real. It was pretty exciting. You don't often get past their sensory issues to that extent. You're going to see some rigidity. And I'm not based on neurological differences, but the rigidity can be really about anxiety and emotional concerns as well. When their executive functioning is not able to engage, you're going to see that rigidity. Whether it's because they don't really have good executive functioning because of neurological difficulties, or they don't have access to their executive functioning because of whatever emotional state that they're in. And the socialization, of course, that one is really going to stand out in how they're interacting socially. Are they initiating? Are they joining in? Are they connecting with other kids? Do they seem to be developing friendships? Those things are all pretty key and important to figuring out why they might be acting like they are. One little guy that I was watching, they were really concerned about his behavior and his interactions. And he really, he kind of got the idea of initiating, and some of his initiations were okay, but he overdid it. He did too much. And so we're looking at, he's charging it, it looks like he's throwing toys and he's disrupting things, but when you sat back and observed him, the reason for his behavior was because he was trying so hard to initiate, and he was just like a baby hippo in a room full of mice. He's just too much. There was too much of him. He was too enthusiastic. It was too intense.
A lot of this is very similar to what we heard about at ASD. How would we be able to tell the difference, and is that important?
It's not important. It really isn't. The thing is, you just have to know what you're seeing. And the thing is, in FAS, you have that added, there's some added kind of behavioral type things like not learning from consequences. And that, so you have to know whether or not they learn from consequences, but do you have to know that that's FAS? Like the diagnosis to a large extent is not important. It's what you're seeing and why you're seeing it. If you know they have sensory issues, does it matter what the diagnosis is? If you know the nature of those sensory issues, does it matter if there's a diagnosis? If you know they have language processing issues, does it matter if there's a diagnosis? Exact same thing with any of those. It doesn't matter if there's a diagnosis. If you can tell that those issues exist, or you suspect those issues exist, you just are going to have strategies for those issues. The diagnoses are helpful because when you pass the kids on to somebody else, there tends to be, oh, they're FAS, that's why, or they're ASD, that's why, you know, they're acting the way they're acting. But there's nothing wrong with just being really descriptive and saying, I think they have some social cognition difficulties because they don't seem to be able to take the point of view of another person, or they really struggle in social interactions, they don't initiate, their conversation is weird and awkward. But it does, I'm suspecting something neurological, but I'm going to treat them this way because I suspect it's neurological. You just try, and this is where the describing what you see is so important, because you're trying to track, I mean, it's not our job to diagnose them. I mean, the diagnosis is a medical thing. Like that's the doctor of the medical field do that, and we just deal with what we see. If the visual supports are effective for an ASD kid, and so you try them on this kid who has some of those characteristics and they work, good. You know, it doesn't really matter. So I want to touch a little bit on reward systems. When I had my initial training in my bachelor's degree back in the early 80s, this was what I was trained on. This is what we were told was how you manage behavior, was reward systems. I know all about intermittent reinforcement, and I could set up a beautiful behavior plan based on all the reward system and the reinforcement and everything that was very intensive in my initial training. I feel like you have to be very careful when you use reward systems. They are something that can set a kid up for a real sense of failure. They can be a little too global for the kid. There's things you have to take into account. You have to be sure of a few things, and I just wanted to touch on this because of that. You need to know not so much what the behavior is that you don't want to see, but what the behavior is you want to see instead. So the kid needs to have that balance. They really need to know what is the behavior that you expect from them. I had another thought and it's gone. It's gone. You also have to understand why they're not using that behavior. Why they're not using the behavior that you want to see. So the behavior you want to see, the expected behavior for that is really critical. You need to know if they understand the situation and what the expected behavior is for that situation. Are they capable of using that behavior? Do they have their neurological capability to use the behavior? Because sometimes what we're expecting them to do in that situation is above their neurological capability. It's kind of like, because a 4-year-old can talk in full sentences, assuming that they can read in full sentences, which is, of course, ridiculous. Like, we have to think of the neurological capability, and if we can expect that behavior of them. The skills necessary to do the behavior. Do they have the skill set? Are they capable of it, but they just don't know how to do it? Do they know how to do it, but they don't know when to use the behavior? Can they do it, but impulsivity, it gets in the way? There's all kinds of factors that might be interfering with them using the behavior you want to see. And again, you need to be specific about the behavior that you're looking for. And then you need to explore why they're not using that behavior. Not even so much, if you're thinking in terms of setting up a reward system, you really don't want to think in terms of what they're doing. You want to think of what they're not doing that you want them to do. That's really important. Have they practiced that behavior in the context they need it? Some kids, They might do the behavior in some contexts, but not other contexts. They might sometimes even do the behavior some of the time in the right way. That doesn't mean that they've really internalized that this is when I have to do it, at the time I have to do it. They may not have internalized that. And it really, the interesting thing about working with autistic kids is they really teach you a lot about how many steps back you have to take to teach something some of the time. How many things you have, how far you have to break it down in order to teach it. And how subtle some of these things are. You might have a skill that, like, I know I can go back to that joining in skill, and I talked about all the steps necessary to be able to join into, say, play or a conversation. And they might have some of those skills, but if they haven't got all of those little bits to it, expecting them just to walk up and join in is going to be really difficult for them. So, they might not know the right context to use it in. They might start joining in at a time when the teacher's teaching and the class is expected to be listening and using their whole body listening to be good listeners. And they might think this is the time that they can go and try their joining in skills, which of course it isn't the right time to try their joining in skills. So there's all kinds of factors to that, and you have to be really careful that you've got all those things in a row. And then the other thing is, if the supports are in place that allow them to perform the behavior effectively, so if in order to do what you want them to do, say the joining in thing, say you've practiced the joining in, they know how to do it, they've done it, have they got the visuals that they need to do it? Have they got the situation set up the way they need it? Have they had the instruction in it the way they need it? Those things are really important. Reward systems alone do not actually change behavior. It's all our strategies and supports that teach the behavior that will ultimately change it. But they can encourage the child to use the behavior. If you have made sure that you have specifically defined the behavior you want to see, because you have to be able to specifically teach it. If they have been taught the behavior and they understand what it is and why they use it. If they have practiced the behavior. If they have any visual supports to support them with that behavior. When all those are in place, and now you want them to use it in the situation. A good example is raising their hand instead of blurting. This was a kindergarten kid that I'm thinking of. They had taught him this, and now they had reached a point where he was sometimes doing this, and he knew the skill, he had practiced it, he had the social stories at the beginning of the day, he had the visual supports, he understood it, he knew why, he had all those things in place. Now he's ready for it to be rewarded. Now we can reward him. But not until then. And sometimes it's not even that effective. So I'd say regard reward systems with caution. I have had a ton of experience with them, and I generally don't use it an awful lot. I might, if I see a definite pattern of a student improving, say in their speech sound production, and I see them improving, I know they're improving, I will do maybe a graphing system to show them so they can track their progress. But I'm not going to do it if I don't see the progress, if I don't know they're improving, because I don't want them to see it going down, because then they'll go, oh, I'm not getting any better. And that's a big one. I had, when my daughter was young, and she had all these behavior problems in school, we had her on a reward system, a sticker system, and this was just a really light bulb thing for me too, because I hadn't really put all this stuff together at that point, which I wish I had. I wish I knew then what I know now, but anyway, what's done is done. And she's good. But at the time, to make her behave, we had these sticker reward systems in place for her. And what happened was, every time she didn't get a sticker for her reward, and pretty soon, how effective was that reward system? It changed nothing, and she didn't get any stickers. I set up kind of a visual schedule for her at one point because she had a babysitter in the morning, so I could go to work. And the babysitter had no kids of her own and no experience. And so when she didn't, if she was being naughty, like their schedule was, you know, get your shoes changed, get your clothes changed, wash your hands, brush your teeth, whatever. It was the plan for the morning, right? And so as soon as she completed each task, she was supposed to get a sticker for that task. Well, when she started creating problems for the babysitter would go and rip a sticker off. We know that's bad, But it meant that, you know, it really opened my eyes how ineffective reward systems can be. You have to be so careful with them. I don't ever want to say throw them out because I think they have their place. I just think you have to be really careful that what you're expecting the child to do is realistic. They have the skills, you've defined it specifically enough, they have had some practice and some teaching in it. And it really is about just nudging them into using it when they need to use it. So that's what I think about behavior, about reward systems. I think I talked a little bit about the whole punishment thing earlier, didn't I? I said that, right? What we do with the punishment is we have the clear plan laid out. I do something, and I didn't put this in your handout, but I do something that's actually super effective with the kids. It's called a consequence map, and it was actually one of the NIMO's SLPs that first introduced this idea to me. This is where you have your situation right here. Whatever it happens, left homework at home. And what happens, oh, hold on. That's not the situation, it's not the negative. The situation is homework, say. And say the child has a problem with leaving their homework at home. So the first one is left homework at home. So what happens when you leave your homework at home? I don't know. What's something that happens if a kid leaves his homework at home?
You lose marks.
Lose marks, there you go. And how does mom and dad feel about that? Disappointed, right. And how am I going to feel when I lose marks and mom and dad are disappointed? I'm going to feel pretty crummy. So let's say I bring my homework to school. So I bring it to school. I get marks. Do you see where this is going? And then mom and dad are happy, and then ultimately I'm going to feel better. Again, I would do this when I know the kid is capable and has the executive functioning ability to make that choice. Because the kids with executive functioning problems who have real disorganization issues are not going to, this isn't a choice. They can't do this. That's not their decision. It's their brain's decision not working for them. So I would do that when I know there's an option for them. And so the other time I'll do that is with the guy with the hockey stick. I did this with him because he had been really escalated. The consequences had happened. He understood why the consequences had happened, but we needed some sort of motivation to get him to start thinking about strategies to use and bringing into him some awareness that he has a choice of implementing strategies to avoid getting to that place. It wasn't so much about you're not going to throw a hockey stick anymore, it was you're not going to let yourself get that escalated again. So it's, you know, you have to be somewhat careful with it, but it helps them to see that there's a choice. If they're capable of making those two choices, then they can see it pretty clearly. So I do like those. So now the strategies that I'm going to talk about there's so many similarities between the needs of language processing, executive functioning, and autism. Autism has executive functioning and language processing. Language processing goes hand in hand with executive functioning so much of the time. All of these strategies are useful for any of those and for many other kids too. And I have a lot of times classroom teachers just use strategies for the entire class because they're so effective for everybody. So the first thing is making sure that their basic needs are being met. So there's sleep. Sleep is a big one. We were just talking about this guy that was in a class last year, huge executive functioning guy, no task initiation. He just sat there and just sat there. And we were standing on our heads trying to come up with some sort of strategy that would get him to stop just sitting there. And this year, he's in with the same teacher, and he's suddenly starting. He's getting things done. Well, last year we knew he wasn't getting enough sleep, but this year he started getting enough sleep, and he's a completely different kid, as long as he maintains getting enough sleep. He's starting tasks, he's getting them done, he's participating in class. As soon as he doesn't get enough sleep, he lapses into last year's stuff. So, nutrition is another one. You know, making sure they're fed. Hungry kids, or kids who are getting the wrong nutrition, they haven't had a hit of protein, they're not getting enough vitamins in their diet, those kids are not going to be able to engage their executive functioning as well. And also if a kid is concentrated on being hungry, that's going to shut down their executive functioning too. And then and then anxiety is another one. And there's so many things to reduce anxiety. Remembering that, these are some, I don't know where I put the 5-point scale, but I wanted to make sure I talk about the 5-point scale. There's a lot of little things you can do that can kind of take some of the anxiety away. Being a factual talker, focusing on specific factual details will sometimes take just removing the emotion from whatever the situation is will help them to come down out of their anxiety. The job talk one is really interesting. I had a kindergarten teacher come to me the other day, and she was telling me about this little guy who was just refusing to do anything. And of course, when I said why, all this home stuff is the reason why. So we've got all this home stuff. We can't solve the home stuff, but maybe we can start by seeing what we can do to bring him down enough so he can participate in class, because he's just like this. So she tried the choices. That didn't work. So I suggested to her using the job talk where you assign roles. Do you want to be the reader or do you want to be the writer? Do you want to be the light turner-offer or do you want to be the water turner-offer? And she said it worked really, really well. She started using that in the class and it worked really great for him. He started participating. So removing emotion from it, like thinking about things that we do that unconsciously increase the emotion. Oh, you can do this. I know you can do it. Like that's somehow putting an expectation on them. Or this is easy. That one, I think, my daughter's been trying to do trades math. I have a master's degree. This trades math stuff, I absolutely don't get it. Like maybe to you guys who have math brains, it's really easy. I do not get it whatsoever. I do not understand triangles to save my soul. And so I can't get this. And I had someone say to me, well, why don't you get that? That's super easy. Well, that doesn't make me feel very good. That makes me feel kind of stupid when someone tells me that it's easy. Well, that's the easy math. I did the calculus. That was easy. This trades math stuff, I don't get. But because it's all very individual, we don't want to put our judgments on what it looks like to them. So we have to be careful with that. Now, I've got something called time robbers that I'm going to show you guys. Yeah?
Sorry, what do you say instead then? If you don't say it's easy or you can do it, all you have to do is, what do you say instead?
That's when you're going to try things like, okay, I understand this is hard for you. Why don't you be the thinker and I'll be the writer? You're going to turn it around so that you're going to try and take some of the pressure off them in some way.
More about the role.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's what I would do. The time robbers I'm going to show you is great in terms of it focuses the student on actions and strategies, and it doesn't focus them on the emotion. So it gives them, it's a checklist that they can go through. Now, I realized after I put it on the PowerPoint, and I didn't stop and think about doing anything about it. It's actually copyrighted, the checklist that I have. So make your own. Don't use the one I've given you, okay? But you'll get the idea. The other thing is that will help them along to reduce their anxieties if they can see what they're working towards. And that can be a little sketch. That can just be something as simple as, okay, we're writing, I want you to write a 3-page book report. What's it going to look like? Page 1 is going to have your introduction, and you're going to start the body of it. Page 2 is going to have the body, and page 3 is going to have your conclusion. If they can see that laid out in some sort of visual way, it's going to take some of their anxiety away of what they're working towards and what the finished product looks like. Oh, look, I put color in. Okay, so you guys have heard the graduate release model. You watched a video on that? Okay. When we're teaching things, we always have to think that when they don't have the skill at all, they're going to need a ton of support to learn that skill. We want them to work towards independence, and it doesn't matter if you're teaching an academic skill, a social skill, self-regulation skill, whatever you're teaching them, they're going to need a lot of support at first. And we don't pull that support out all of a sudden. We don't teach them once and say, there you go, you've got it. And it just like you wouldn't in math. You wouldn't say, here's how you do it, and walk away and assume they can do it. You want to give them a lot of support in it, and then you're going to pull your support out until they can do it independently. The same with any of these social skills or anything else you're training. They're going to need a ton of support at first. They're going to need you to walk them through it. They're going to need visuals. They're going to need everything you can throw at them. And then you're going to inch the support away. So that's a really important thing to remember. Regardless of the skill, that you need to start with a high level of support if they don't have the skill. Because they need it to be taught as much as they need their math taught and their reading taught. It's a skill that they don't have that they need to be taught. And it's because of their neurology that they don't have it. Visuals, I talk a lot about visuals. You absolutely can't go wrong with implementing visual supports. The only thing you might do is overclutter your classroom with them, but you have to be careful with that. But in terms of helping kids to self-regulate, helping kids to use executive functioning skills or develop executive functioning skills, becoming more independent, understanding what's going on, you cannot go wrong with visuals. Really important for your FAS guys too. In fact, I remember a story about this little girl who had the the little board maker pictures telling her the sequence of steps to wash her hands and brush her teeth and do all the morning routine stuff. She had that up there for 3 years, and her mom finally said, you know what, you've had this here for 3 years. I don't think you need it anymore. She took it away and the kid couldn't do it. She just stood there. FAS, because their brains are wired a little differently, they actually can never go without visuals. And how frequently do we go without visuals? How many people have phones? You have your calendar on your phone? You know, we all have visual supports. These computers, there are visual supports. Visuals are anything that you can see. Another really good strategy is preloading them, so preparing them for what's going to happen. Sometimes, it's really good to have visual supports for that too. Some kids are okay with just having it auditorily, but a lot of kids really need to see what that change is going to look like.
I was just wondering, there's this whole thing of having a sparse classroom.
Yeah.
Basically with no visuals, I've seen some of them.
Yeah.
How does that work if a child that's either FAS or autistic?
Well, I think when you've got a kid that really struggles with sensory overload, I think those classrooms are great, but you have to have some visuals. You have to. But maybe they're not visuals that you leave up all the time. Maybe you have a board like this with the visuals you're using right now, and then you spin it around, and you have other visuals on them. I think, and I think especially for the FAS guys, the less cluttered the classroom looks, the easier for them. But I'm going to talk a lot about organization in a bit here too, because I think your classroom also, you have to think about how you organize your class in terms of where things are. Sorry?
Like you need word balls and things for the rest of the kids.
Yeah, but I think the thing is keeping lots of visual space in between it, lots of empty space between things too. I think sometimes having nothing on the walls is a little bit of a big goal. Classrooms need stuff on the walls because you have activities that you're going through. But I think you do need to have places of visual rest where you can take your eyes off the visual and go onto something blank so you can just have a little bit of a rest for it. So I think it's be sparse, be careful, be sparse, but have visuals. It's striking a balance. And I do think that there's a lot of evidence for, say if you had a classroom full of FAS kids, probably having nothing on the walls would be awesome. So I think it's a matter of judge your population of kids that you get, see what their needs are. If they're a bunch of kids that seem to be find the visuals too overwhelming, then really pare them down so they're just there a little bit at a time. So now the other one is the declarative language. Trying to put it on the kid. So an example of this, I have this little girl who's sort of a moderately low little girl. And I was in her class with her, and they were in those pods of 4, and she had her stuff spread over both pods. Now she is used to having a lot of EA support, where the EAs come along and hustle it up together, and gotta move your stuff, help, come on, let's get it all together. So I thought, I wonder what she can do independently. So I just said, And she looked at me, and she's quite she's a very social girl, so she gets the social cues, so she could pick up what I was doing quite easily because of her strength in social skills. And I said, And I looked at the papers on the other desk, because the other thing too is there was another girl sitting there who was looking really ticked off with these papers spread all over her desk. So I just did that. And this little girl looks at me, and then she looks And she then looks at the other girl's face, and she reads it, and she goes, "Oh, I'm so sorry!" And she gathered up her papers and set it down. And I thought, wow, like she really didn't need an awful lot of prompting to be able to follow through on that and recognize what the problem was and come up with a solution for it. It was actually pretty cool. And she's kind of a little girl, so that was pretty exciting that she could do that. You try the least amount, when you're using this kind of language, you try the least amount and see what they can do. So some autistic kids would have a real trouble with that. They wouldn't necessarily pick up on your cues when you're going, and you're looking at the mess on the floor. So you might add something, "I see garbage on the floor." And some of our artistic kids go, "Oh yeah, so do I." So you just keep adding to it then. I wonder what we could do about it. And just keep adding the supports until you get a response. And then that's the level that they need right now, is that maybe a higher level of response. But hopefully, you know, you can take them down to the and get them to start looking around for what needs to be done with just a Okay, and anytime that you're getting them to think for themselves, this is where that inquiry-based learning is pretty cool, because you are really encouraging the kids to engage their own thinking, ask the questions themselves, and get them thinking about things on their own. We don't want to just feed them information. We want them to learn how to learn. We want them to be independent in their learning. And the kids with really weak executive function, they really need a lot of support with that. That's something they struggle with, but you want them to do it because you want them to practice that. If they don't practice it, they're not going to be able to learn it. Categorization is important in terms of organization. We organize all of our vocabulary instinctively. Our brains organize our vocabulary into categories. So if I'm searching for the word horse in my vocabulary, I am looking under animal, I am looking under farm animals, I am looking under things with 4 legs, I am looking under animals that live on a farm, have hooves and a mane. So but I've got it all categorized according to that. If I was looking for an animal with mane and paws, I'm not looking under the same category as horse necessarily. But that's kind of where our descriptive language comes from, is all about these categories that we're organizing things into. We organize our stuff in terms of categories. So we keep our cleaning supplies in this closet, or we're supposed to. I have them in 3 places, but in this place. We have our laundry room. We have our kitchen. Our houses are organized by category. We organize our cupboards by category. I have my plates in one cupboard. I have my cups in another cupboard. I have my pots in a drawer. Like the categories of things. I wouldn't put my cups in with my pots. Because that would not be organized. We put our stuff in the right spot, right? We organize things by category. So in a classroom, when you're thinking about your classroom, and this also gets kids thinking and using their executive functioning and encouraging them to think about organization. When you're setting up your classroom, if you have your writing tools in one place and all the paper supplies, the art supplies are in another, you keep them organized by that, you have them labeled, and when the kid says, I don't have any paper, where do we keep our paper supplies in the class? And you want them to orient towards where the papers are, and you're teaching them to organize by category, which is what our brains naturally do, is organize by category. So by teaching them that, they will be developing those kind of categorization, organizational type skills. And instead of just telling them they're over by the window, you tell them, you engage them, their own thinking, where do we keep our writing tools in this class? Where do we keep our word wall in this class, our word knowledge? Where do we keep our strategies in this class? However you've got your room organized, as long as you've got it organized by some sort of category, and then you encourage them to start thinking about where these things are based on the category. Movement, well thinking. I don't know about you. I mean, this is a great one, and I know they have to do it. I know sometimes they have to move to think. Sometimes it drives me nuts, just even one-on-one with the kid. They're sitting there wiggling away, and you're trying to do your thing, and it's just, oh my gosh, okay. But they need it, right? They need to have movement while they're thinking. You can get those cushions on the seats that allow them to get that natural feedback. Some kids work well sitting on a ball, some don't. But again, like, you can use different things that help them to get that movement that they need, so that, you know, it calms their body enough to be able to work. Personally, like I say, I find it hard, but I know they have to. And the other one, is, of course, is the movement breaks that are so important for kids. We have this French immersion teacher who's just fabulous. She gets the kids, she'll get them working and working and working, and then she'll think, they've been sitting too long. So she has this exercise routine that she takes the kids through, gets them all up on their feet, and they start doing exercises. 5 minutes, they sit back down and continue their work. It's great, and the kids really benefit from it. And again, trying to accommodate their sensory needs in the classroom as much as possible. We talked a bit about that. And clear, unambiguous structure for their day. These guys really need literal, clear structure. They don't want to be fuzzy about things. If you give things that could be read in one or two ways, that's going to just confuse them and cause them problems. They need to be able to follow it literally, whatever the structure is for the day. Now, speaking to them, this is your auditory supports. So bearing in mind that, auditory is not the only way to deal with these guys because it will not last in their brains. There still are things that we can do with what we're saying to them to make things a little easier for them. Allow processing time. The guy I was telling you about, I counted to, I think the first time it was like counting to 30, and some of the time I counted to 20. It's being comfortable with that silence that allows for the processing time. In the classroom, you can't always do that. You can't sit there and wait for them while you count to 30, because there's 30 seconds gone, and 30 seconds in a classroom is a lot of time. You can say, I'm going to ask you this. You think about this, and I'll come back to you. And for a kid like this one, this particular guy, he was able to sit and focus on that the whole time. His brain didn't wander, he didn't lose track. Some kids, they forget it, or they get distracted by their own brain before they've processed it, which is kind of causes them additional problems. Some kids, if they take that processing time, they're really focused on it, and they can hang on to their focus of it. So it's also, that's judging the kid. Some kids need the repetition instead of the processing time, or with the processing time. This is where your speech pathologist is really helpful, because, as I'm saying that because I am a speech pathologist, but we can pick up this stuff. We can tell you, we can peel that stuff out and say to you, do they just need the big chunk of processing time, or do they need a little bit of processing time, then a repetition, then a little bit more processing time? We can help tease that out. Keeping sentences simple and at their level. This was interesting. I don't know if I referred to this. Keeping it literal. Making sure that you don't have a lot of metaphorical language. I talked about this earlier. Just making sure that for these guys, again, simple, concrete, to the point is what you want to keep it. And ambiguity too. If something can be read in two different ways, and you can't monitor your sentences the whole time you're talking, but if you're having a child who's not really following you or having trouble understanding you, you can think about how you said it, and maybe you just need to revise how you said it. Pausing between sentences, for some kids that just makes all the difference in the world. It just slows down the pace enough for them that their processing can keep up. And that's like giving information one chunk at a time. I'm giving you this piece, and then this piece. It's the same as providing that pause. Emphasizing key words, focusing, that helps them to learn what's important. You're going to highlight it, maybe you're going to write it on the board, maybe you're going to say it a little louder, maybe you're going to repeat just that word, but in some way highlight and emphasize what's the words that are important. And they're learning to be comfortable with silence. That's a good one. We are not, as a culture, very comfortable with silence. We're always trying to fill it. And some of the time, when you're able, because I also know in a classroom that it's not always possible, but when you're able to just let the silence happen while they process, it can be really powerful. One of the schools that I have, I actually go up to the high school and I work in the life skills room up there. And one of the lovely things, they do this check-in in the morning. And these kids are also processors. And it's really a wonderful thing to watch the adults accommodate that. So a question is asked, and everybody's just sitting there. And it's just like processing, processing, processing. But the adults in that environment have learned they have to give that processing time, and everybody's totally comfortable with 30 seconds going by while the students are processing. It's a really nice thing.
Do you have any suggestions as to how to sort of create the classroom community where other students are patient with different processing times? Like, I don't know if you could do activities that would show, like, some people are faster with motor reactions, and are faster, or there's some sort of understanding, so the kids are like,
Yep.
be patient, and then, because
Yep.
my problem is that the rest of my class falls asleep while I'm waiting for, like, I'm trying to be really patient with one kid and give them the time
Yep.
to process it, but I lose half the class that's.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of an ongoing issue for teachers, especially with the kids especially with the younger kids, because they only have the attention span of that anyway, and then you're asking them to, wait several seconds while little Johnny over here processes. It is an ongoing issue, and it is a matter of just part of the teaching process is learning to be patient with others, and that's a lesson. It's just part of the lesson, right? And you always think of all those things, just as little Johnny needs to learn how to say question when he doesn't understand, all these other kids need to learn how to wait when Johnny's listening. It's teaching. It's part of your lesson, right?
Yeah. I was just wondering if there was I feel like for some reason I heard at some point, maybe there's a specialist or someone that could come in or just give advice on sort of how to teach really young kids about that understanding of it.
Well, I think there's lots of people who could. Like it is, I don't know anyone that specifically talks to that, but you can run the lesson yourself on understanding individual differences, and it's kind of like having the talk on autism, right? I'm good at this, you're good at this. I watched our pop-art consultant last year do a really great kind of individual difference talk, and it wasn't so much directly addressing autism, but what she did is she had all the kids stand up and go to one side of the room, and then she said, if you're really good at soccer, I want you to go to this side. If you're really good at, baseball, go to there. If you're really good at math, come over here. And she just threw out all these different things, some academic, some sports, some creativity type things, and got the kids really thinking about how some people are still standing over there and some people are in all the groups, and it really kind of brought that home. And that was about a grade 3-4 level. I think for the younger kids, you just have to do it a little differently at their level. You just make sure that whatever approach you're using is very much at their level. But I think you're right, anything that focuses on how we're different. And I've just seen a lot of teachers say, sometimes people need extra time to think. And Johnny needs that extra thinking time. So it's our job to be quiet and let Johnny have his think time. And again, that's not always possible. And sometimes for the other kids, it is part of their learning curve. So, yeah. And repeating information is necessary. I say allow the processing time first, but you kind of have to judge. Some of these kids, if you just automatically say it twice, they've got it and off they go. Sometimes they need you to say it, count to 5, say it again, and then they're good. Some kids, if you repeat it, and they haven't finished processing it, but they're still processing, and then you repeat it, they've got to start at the beginning and start processing it all over again. So that's where it's kind of knowing what kind of processing system does this kid have. Do they have just a slow one that you just need to give them time? Do they need the repetitions? If they automatically get a repetition, they just need to hear it twice and then they're good to go. Like this, knowing what their brain is doing with that information can make the difference between them understanding it or not. Yeah?
I heard a really good strategy for the whole class for processing time. You can have all the kids put their heads on their desk and put their hands up when they have, so no one's looking, put their hands up when they have one idea or 2 ideas, it shows with their fingers, or 3 ideas.
Oh, that's a good idea.
So it gives everybody in the class a chance to process.
Yeah, and you know what, that's really good because you could tie that into your lessons about everybody having different types of brains and thinking times. Yeah.
There's a student in our professional class that it's been recommended to us that he needs to hear instructions from 2 voices, like one person will give him an instruction and then another will give that same instruction. Is that a processing thing? I don't know the reason for it, they just said that works.
That's interesting. Well, this is how different all kids are, right? I've never heard of anything like that. That's fascinating.
It's just a suggestion, and it doesn't work, so go with it. But
Oh, it doesn't work?
No, it
does work?
Yeah.
Oh, isn't that interesting?
Okay.
Maybe some types of voices he processes better than others?
I don't know.
Isn't
Okay,
that
I just know
fascinating?
that
I've never heard of that. I think that's fascinating. I love it. Who'd have thought, right? And somebody figured that out.
I know, that's the
Isn't that cool? Don't you think it's amazing when people figure stuff out like that? How did somebody get that? That's great. Rephrase sentences to a more simple form if they don't understand. It was interesting. I was in this class watching this autistic-like boy. He's not diagnosed yet. And the teacher says to me, because I had done the language assessment on him, and in the language report it said, of course, use visual supports, blah, 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 because I always put that in my recommendations. The teacher comes over to me with this, and I'm not a speech pathologist anymore. I'm there under my other hat. But he's got this report, and he says, I don't do visuals. I'm an auditory teacher. And so I said, well, you know, I understand, and I'm not asking you to change your teaching style. It's just to be aware that of his comprehension difficulties and the visuals would help him, but I understand. I never ask teachers to change their teaching style. So then I watch this teacher. So, okay, he's not a visual teacher. So he gives the instruction to the class, and about a third of the kids get the instructions. So he puts his hand up, he repeats the instruction again, but he makes it a lot simpler. And then he's got another third of the class. And the last third are still doing it, including my guy that I was there for. So he puts up his hand again. Is this visual? That's a visual. You can see it. It's a visual, right? He puts up his hand again and he takes the instruction down to about 2 words. And he's got the rest of the class. That was amazing. And yes, he did use a visual clue. So yeah, okay, you talk, but you're not over-talking because you're shortening what you say as you need to. And you're using visual clues for the kids. So it's kind of like, he thought of himself as a real auditory teacher, and yet he was doing a lot of really cool things in there that was really supportive of the kids who needed it. He just didn't want Boardmaker in there. And that was where he was pairing his speaking with gestures to get the attention of the kids. It was great. Less is more when it comes to talking. This is a hard one. I find this really difficult. Speech pathologists have a really hard time stopping talking. You should see our conferences. It's just a nightmare. Everybody talks at once. You know, we're not good listeners. But it's really important, and you can see the difference with some of these kids if you just stop yourself from talking. It's a good rule of thumb. Breaking large assignments into smaller parts. I'm not sure why that's in the auditory part, but I guess I must have been tired when I did that. I guess if you're giving like verbal instructions and you break your verbal instructions down into parts, that will be easier for the kids. So when we're looking at, those would be the auditory things you do. When we're looking at the visuals versus the auditory, here's the reasons you would use visuals. Visuals do not run away. Auditory supports are fleeting. The language comes in and it's gone, and you can't refer back to it easily. Visuals, you can keep looking back to it. Visuals promote independence, because if I replace that, my constant instruction with some sort of visual support, you can actually replace your verbal instruction with it. If I don't have the visual support, every time I have to prompt you through, then it's not going to increase your independence. It's going to make you dependent on the verbal prompt. So that's why we have those Boardmaker strips above the hooks to say backpack, shoes, coat, whatever. That is going to create independence because you're going to take your verbal prompting away. You're not going to say, now, hang up your backpack, hang up your coat, change your shoes. We're just going to point to the picture. And we're going to get their attention on these pictures. And pretty soon we can fade that point over time so that they can come in, start looking at their pictures and be very independent with that. But if we just have the verbal prompting through it, they are not going to get the independence that they need. Visuals hold the attention longer than auditory because you've got something to focus on, and because it doesn't run away. It stays in one place. And it's easier to retrieve information from visual supports from your memory than it is auditory. Again, the auditory doesn't have, it's gone. It comes in and it's gone. And the visuals usually, they're a little bit more conceptual when you present them. So they tend to be easier to understand. They're like a summary. They present the idea in one form, and it also makes it concrete. You're making your abstract concrete with visuals. So here's in support of visuals, they make your abstracts concrete. I just went through that. You can manipulate the visuals to show changes in your day, to show changes in your timetables. When we're setting up visual schedules for kids, we put an oops card in there too, because our guys who have trouble with the unexpected, they don't have the cognitive shifting for that. If you put an oops card in their schedule, that allows for the unexpected. So that's a good way of helping them to accept change. You can do all kinds of things with visuals. There's all kinds of different ways of doing them. And if one doesn't work, you can try another type of visual. There's so many out there. And the comprehension, when you make it visual, for our guys who have language processing problems, the visuals really increase their understanding of the situation. you're making something that is potentially abstract and fuzzy for them, and you're giving them a picture that represents it, that suddenly answers their questions about it. They didn't know they had, but they didn't understand it. You can process language concepts more quickly using visual supports. When you're working on increasing your language comprehension, you pair the visuals with the language, and you are going to get an increase in the comprehension of the language, because now they have an association of those visuals with the language. We have this, I'm going to say early learner, autistic boy, who has learned a lot of language through echolalia. Do you guys know what echolalia is? Echolalia is when kids, it's kind of unique to autism, usually with those more early learner type kids, when they repeat words and phrases that they associate with a certain situation. So a lot of times I'll have people tell me the kid is really verbal, but they're actually echolalic. They're using the language and they can develop it in an appropriate way, or it's not really developed, it's taught. They've been taught a phrase for a situation. So they're on the swing and they say, can I have a push please? And they have learned if they put that sequence of sounds together, somebody comes and gives them the push and that's what they wanted. Or if they say, can I go to the bathroom please? They've learned that allows them to go relieve themselves, and that's what they need and want at that moment. But sometimes with echolalia, they will use movie talk. They will learn a line from a movie that they associate with something. So maybe when they're watching that movie, they're suddenly getting hungry. And the line from the movie might be, look out, Batman! So now whenever they're hungry, they're going to say, look out, Batman! And that means I'm hungry, but you don't know that, because how are you supposed to interpret that? But it's that they're really learning the words in association with a situation. And they're not developing language. They've learned these set phrases. Yeah.
So I've seen that in daycare, and I thought it was just because they're younger. Do they grow out of that, or is that something that just sticks around?
In autism?
Yeah.
They don't grow out of it because they have a language disorder. They are not developed, they're not following the normal developmental sequence of language. So, but what happens is, if we didn't teach them better ways of communication, yeah, they would always do it, because they are a language disorder. But because we're going to teach them better ways to communicate, eventually they will learn more. So this little guy that I'm talking about, he has a lot of these phrases, and he sounds like he's pretty verbal. But what he has is echolalia that he's using really, really functionally and really, really well. So that he doesn't always need his pictures to communicate. He can often use these sentences that he has learned to associate with different needs and situations. Yes, a brain with executive functioning problems is a very chaotic brain. I know what that feels like. My brain is in chaos a lot of the time. Visuals really help those kids to bring organization to their chaotic brain. Showing steps in a sequence. So when you're working on solving problems, when you're working on the steps in an activity, it lays it all out for them. It makes those steps really concrete and helps them to understand. Again, it's about bringing that organization to a disorganized brain. And for kids with ASD, they can't live without visuals. They provide the structure and the predictability for the day. Visuals can be anything you can see. As I said before, I've had kids that have had visual schedules with the board maker pictures. I've had kids with visual schedules with text. A lot of kids, there's a perception that visuals look like this. These are the board maker pictures. So when I start talking about visuals for kids, I often get people saying, oh, but they can read, they don't need visuals. Yeah, they need visuals, but they're not going to look like this. I'm not going to give a reader board maker pictures unless he can't understand the meaning of the word shoes. If he can read shoes, but he can't understand the meaning of it, then yeah, I am going to give him the picture. But as long as he can understand the meaning of those words, we are going to, where is it? I'm going to do something like this for him. This isn't happening. I don't know why, this coffee's funny. But this is a kid, we actually had these cut up and on Velcro, and we had a chart for him showing the time of the day. And he would just take the Velcro things and he would put the words on the schedule to make his own schedule up using text. He was not a guy who could write. He couldn't do written output. He had motor problems, and he also had that autistic thing of not being able to initiate, on an executive functioning thing, not being able to initiate writing. He had a really hard time with output. That's really, really common with the kids with autism. A really hard time getting going, getting writing, putting anything on paper. They'll do anything to not do that. So you've all seen the shape of the day thing. This is a classic classroom visual that's very, very useful for kids, for all our kids. What we often do, we take that shape of the day, this is kind of fuzzy, but we take the shape of the day and we make an individual schedule out of it. This particular schedule was for a 12-year-old girl with really impaired language processing, really impaired. She had a lot of behaviors as a result. She was just a tall, gorgeous girl, 12 years old, beautiful girl, but very aggressive. And she needed the visuals to understand her day. And a lot of her aggression was really around lack of understanding. And when she had this kind of schedule, this really reduced her aggression and made her a lot more engaged in her day because she got it, she understood it. But what we would do is we would take the classroom shape of the day from back here and see what was coming up and help her to go through that shape of the day and transfer it to her own visual schedule. This is a little cluttered for some kids. For her, this worked just fine. But for some kids, this would have been too cluttered. This is one of our wonderful EAs that we have. This is how easy visuals can be. She's got it around her neck. You see her, this is the back view. I said I wanted a picture of her back view because you see her walking down the hall like this. And she said to me, you tell them, the reason I have them on my back is because when you're working with kindergarten students and they're around your front, you'll hit them on the head with them. So you don't want to be injuring the students with your visuals. But she has these all the time, the entire time. It's the first thing she puts on in the morning is her visuals. And she'll just go through as she needs them. She'll find the one she wants, talk it through with the kid. Kindergarten kids all benefit from visuals, no matter how much ability they have, because it helps them to understand school when they're just, and their language isn't developed enough for them to do everything auditorily. They need visuals. This is a set of board maker pictures that we just made up. You see under stop, it's actually got a different language there. There was a little girl that just arrived straight from the Philippines, plunked into the classroom in kindergarten, and really, like, poor little thing, she was going sideways. She was upset, she was crying and screaming. Didn't have a clue what's going on. She doesn't speak a word of English. And so the teacher came to me, we made up these visuals for this little girl, just showing the different things, just using the board maker pictures. And we also included photos of some of the staff members because she was very attachment-based kid. This is where that attachment piece is really important. Like, you need to know if that's a really critical thing for them. For this little girl, that attachment thing was really critical. Her dad handed her off to the teacher. So now, in this little girl's mind, the teacher's the only one she can trust. So now the teacher has to start building connections with other teachers in the building so that this little girl will go to PE and go to music and go to library. So then what we did is we had photos of the other teacher with where they were going. So there's a photo under there, I think that's the library teacher, and on top of her picture is a picture of the library, so the library and the teacher that goes with it. So she sees those two things paired, and she understands this teacher goes to the library. Now this is a bright little girl, she just speaks no English, but you can see that helping other kids who are having problems with that whole attachment piece. 5-point scale, so you guys have heard of this. It's a really great tool. It's great because it's simple. It's visual and it's simple, and it can be used for a whole bunch of things. We use it a lot for self-regulation. Doesn't have to be used for self-regulation. Did I get? When it's used for self-regulation, it's more like the blurry one on the left, which didn't turn out really great. I couldn't find a template one that was already used. So the 1 is calm and the 5 is out of control. The 5 is losing it. Everybody's 5 looks different. Sometimes, like for the kid who was smashing the computers, for his 5, it looked like swearing, it looked like hitting it looked like kicking things, hitting things. It was a real acting out type of 5. I've had kids who, at a 5, they're just totally shut down. I have a student who is completely shut down at a 5, and he becomes basically completely nonverbal, completely non-responsive. That's his 5, and that's anxiety that's doing that. So it's going to be very individual for each kid. Some classrooms do a 5-point scale for the whole class. They get every single person in the class to do their own 5-point scale. The important piece of this So when you're doing this, they have to put down what it looks like. So that's a bit of perspective taking. So the autistic kids need to have some assistance with that. What it looks like to other people when you're at a 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 5. 5 is always like out of control. It's almost, you're just looking at survival through a 5. A 4, you can just get it. You can gather control, but you better hurry because it's going to hit a 5 pretty soon. But you can get control at a 4. At a 3 is a great time to head things off the path. When you're at a 3 is when you want to take action and you want to bring yourself down. You don't want to let yourself get any higher than a 3 if you can. And that's the kind of ways that you teach the kids, is letting them know where to, when to intervene with themselves, what it feels like when they're at these different levels, and what they can do about it. So it looks like they're going to have some, the autistic kids will have to have some help because they don't necessarily know what they look like. What it feels like on their inside, it's amazing how some kids can draw that feeling or say what it feels like inside of them. Sometimes I get kids drawing like an explosion at the 5, but they get it, and they can say the sort of things that they do when they're at a 5. They can usually think back to what they've done when they're at a 5 and tell you some of the things that they do. The important one is I can try to. What strategies can I use? When you're at a 5, it's going to be really hard to use any strategies at all. A 5 is sometimes just about trying to make the kids safe and make the environment safe. When they hit a 5, we do not want kids to get to a 5. That's a really unsafe place for them to be, regardless of what their 5 looks like. Even if nobody else is unsafe from what they're doing, they're not really that safe in themselves. Even the kid who shuts right down and goes really quiet, how is that safe for him to be in that space? It isn't. He's not accessible. He's not able to learn. He's not able to think. He's not able to reason. His executive functioning is shut down. He's a completely inaccessible kid, and that's not a safe place to be. The other thing I actually like to add on there, I actually like to add another column that says what the adult can do. Because some kids, it's really important that the adult have strategies for them at each of those levels. That can look like a behavior plan, like the schools, when they have kids who have a lot of big behaviors, they have a behavior plan for the kid, and that's basically what I'm talking about. There is a behavior plan. But some kids don't necessarily have it, and especially those really, really shut down ones. Like I would say for my little guy who's completely shut down when he's at a 5, let's give him some space, and then we're going to inch our way back in there slowly later, but we need to let him come down before we can do that. Always, before we can deal with the behavior, remember they have to come back down to the 1. This is based on the anxiety curve. And this, a 5 is against the law. That book is basically the 5-point scale, but because it's for older kids, it's all about, it's based on the anxiety curve, and it doesn't have a little color-coded thing with the funny little faces and stuff in it. It's got everything centered around the anxiety curve. And it's a really good one. I did that with a 16-year-old, and he totally related to it. He just loved it. The 5 could make me lose control is actually more of an activity that goes along with the 5-point scale, and you can actually use it with either the younger kids or the older kids. And it's just this fold-up thing, and I don't have a copy of it, and I wish I did. I just do it with the kids, kind of make up my own. But you just fold it all out, and it's got the 1, the 2, the 3, the 4, the 5, and then you've got all these different situations, and the kid has to judge where that situation would put them. Where would a fire drill put me? Where would reading in the library put me? Where would having supper with my family put me? Where would a friend coming over put me? And sometimes, you know, the autistic kids doing this, it's absolutely fascinating, because some of the things that put them at a 5 or a 4 are things that are calming to kids who aren't on the spectrum. It's really interesting what you come up with that. But that's a super good resource. It's very adaptable to the classroom. The other thing you can do with it is make, like on the right-hand side here, a loudness scale with it. I mean, I don't know why it's got those zigzaggy things. It doesn't have to. A lot of teachers are using this for to rate the noise level in the classroom. You know, we're writing a test. We need to be at a 1 right now. A 1 means no talking. This is test taking time. So we're going to have no talking right now. Their colors also are supposed to match the 5-point scale, and they don't. I just noticed. This is the time robbers. You can tie this to time, learning about time. But time robbers are great, and this is the one that's copyrighted, just so you know, so don't go making copies and leaving with them, just make up your own. This is where you introduce it along while you're teaching kids about time, and Time can be stolen from you by robbers. And these robbers are in you. My body. Thirsty would be a time robber. Am I thirsty? That would be a time robber. Am I hungry? Am I feeling kind of antsy? Do I need to get up and move a little bit? What is stopping me from continuing to work? Right? This is what this is about. And things are stealing my time from applying it to my work. My organization, is my organization the problem? And rating and going through and deciding which of these are getting in your way. And it's interesting, kids love doing this stuff. Like once they understand it, they like it and they're pretty honest about it too. I find the kids, they're going to look for the things and they're going to be really reflective about it. It's kind of an interesting thing to go through. So they basically decide which one of those things is interfering with their learning. What is the time robber stealing? So, and it's kind of teaching them how to evaluate what's going on inside of them. The piece that would go with this is the instructional piece, where you would of course have to talk them through this and talk about what they can do about each of these things. So what's your strategy? If the time robber has taken your time because you're thirsty, what's your strategy for dealing with that time robber? And I think you can use language like we're going to put that time robber in jail because, whatever you want to do. But what is my strategy for dealing with being thirsty? So if I can't find my assignments in paper, what is my strategy for dealing with that? So you go through that and you have lessons with the kids where you talk about the strategies for dealing with each of these things. And then they would have to rehearse it. Again, your gradual release model, it's a skill they have to learn. Introducing it to them once is not going to get them to use it. You're going to have to make it part of your classroom language and your classroom activities, and you have reviews and lessons on it. Lots of support at first, gradually pull out the support until they are thinking about it and using it more independently. That's a really good one. I like that one a lot. This is another strategy that is stop and read the room is kind of a... There's different ways of using this particular strategy. I want to just talk about it in terms of stop and read the room. So this is figuring out what's going on in the room so you know how to adjust your behavior to suit what's happening in the classroom. So I've been out in the hall, I come back in, and I stand for a minute and figure out what's going on. I look at the space, I look at the time, I look at the objects, and I look at the people. Maybe I'm coming back from recess, maybe I'm coming back from lunch. It's figuring out what's happening in the room and then figuring out what you can do about what's going on in that room. So if everybody's sitting down already and already engaged in listening to the teacher, am I going to stomp in really noisily? Am I going to come and quietly sit down at my desk? It also teaches kids to look around for clues in the classroom on what's going on, and if they're not understanding what's going on, reading what other people are doing, paying attention to what other people are doing, making decisions about whether what other people are doing is expected or unexpected for this space, this time, and what's going on in the room. Do the objects in the room, have they changed? Is something new happening in the room? Do we have to look for that? If that's a really good strategy for kids on the spectrum, because they often do not know how to observe the situation that they're either in or they're entering into. So many of these guys enter the room, they've been out for something, they come back in the room with this big, here I am kind of approach, because they don't know how to enter the room. They don't know, and they don't know whether to sit down or stand up, even though everybody else is doing something, they just don't know what they're supposed to do. So this is a strategy to teach them what you're supposed to do when you enter the room, or to figure out what's going on in the room, that looking around and using your observations to figure it out. Along with that is kind of an explanation of how to use that stop strategy and what types of things you need to think about when you're looking around the room, when you're evaluating what's going on with the space, the time, the objects, and the people. So this is a really good strategy. And then one of my favorite ones is the whole time thing. I've talked about the problems with digital clocks. We have the time timers. You guys have seen the time timers with the red, and the red disappears. Those are good. I like time timers. I like them for early learners in particular, because they just need to see visually the time passing. For kids that we don't really expect may not ever get the understanding of an analog clock, the time timers are really good. they also show a chunk of time, and it kind of shows how that fades away. And sometimes kids really need that perspective of it. The time is disappearing, and I need to stay on top of this, keep focused and stay working because I'm losing time. When it comes to, like, you can use analog clocks in such a great number of ways. They're highly, highly visual. They show the sweep of time. They start teaching kids to understand that internal sense of time. Like that guy who I was telling you about when their dad got the analog clock app on his phone and he was able to start his work, that paired with smaller amounts, right? He was able to start his work partly because he could track the time passing on his clock, and he knew that when it got over to there, he was going to be out of time. They start paying attention to the movement of the hands on the clock, and they start recognizing that and what that feels like inside as they watch that hand moving. So analog clocks are great. I actually meant to bring mine. I brought the dry erase markers, but I forgot the clock. Because you can draw right on the face of them to show them too, like with the younger kids in particular. As the kids get older and a little bit, they've got a few more academic skills, you can probably just tune them into the clock without necessarily adding any extra information to them. But with younger guys, I would probably take it and I'd say, okay, so here we are. The big hand is on the 6 right now, and we're going to be in here until the big hand is on the 12. And that time is going to be, so say it's like 9:30, then it's going to be 10 o'clock. Our session ends at 10 o'clock. So we are going to do 3 things in that time. How much, we're going to do, I don't know, what do I do in a session? We're going to do some describing. And then we're going to do some answering questions out of the red book. And then we're going to do, I don't know, I can't think, opposites. Okay, so we're doing 3 things today. How much time do we usually take for describing? Oh, that always takes a long time. Okay, it was a long time. Is that 5 minutes? Is it 15 minutes? Okay, so we decided it's going to be 15 minutes. How much time does opposites usually take us? Oh, that's really fast. We don't need maybe 5 minutes for that? Okay, so we'll take 5 minutes for that. And I'll color code on the clock, draw them the chunk of 15 minutes. I'll draw them the chunk of 5 minutes. And then that leaves us 10 minutes for the red book questions. And then we'll color code that, and then we're going to be done. So what I actually learned I developed is a bunch of clock watchers, but at the same time, they all understood the passage of time. And it also teaches them assigning time to tasks too. If this is going to take 15 minutes, what does 15 minutes feel like? And is that a realistic thing? Okay, so say you're doing some sort of lesson in class, and you tell the class, I think it's going to take a half an hour. We're going to figure out if that's enough time or not enough time. So we're going to color this in, and we're going to see, are we done at this place, or are we done earlier than that? If we're done sooner than that, then we had too much time for it. If we're done later than that, then I didn't leave enough time for that. So you can use the clock to talk about things like that. Or you can say, okay, you have 20 minutes to do this task. At the halfway point, this is the halfway point, and you say it starts at 1 o'clock. Okay, so we've got 20 minutes. So when the big hand is on the 4, that will be 20 minutes. So when the big hand's on the 2, that's our halfway point. Let's figure out where halfway point is on our work. So here's where the halfway point is on our work. Mark that place. We're going to have a check-in when the hand is halfway there, when it's on the 2. You can actually use little magnets and stuff to mark the clock too if you want. We're going to have a check-in at the halfway point and see if we're actually at the halfway point on our work, when we're at the halfway point on our time too. It would work so much better if I had the clock to show you guys. It's so much more interesting. But you can see how you can use the clock, and what you're developing in the kids is how much time it takes to do tasks, how much time to allot to tasks. And you can do the check-ins. Did we need more time? Did we need less time? You're teaching them to understand what time feels like, and that's a huge deficit with executive functioning kids. You are teaching them the basics of time management skills by using the analog clock in your teaching every day. And I get parents to do it too, to work with the analog clock. Sketching out your finished product, kind of like we did over there. Just a quick little drawing of it can make all the difference to the kid if they just know what it's supposed to look like at the end. Because sometimes these kids, they see the assignment and they're like, oh, and they can't visualize it and they don't know. Just giving them a quick little sketch can make all the difference to having them understand what it is they're working towards. This is a good one too, the future thinking. The thing that these guys can't do is plan ahead. They can't think into the future. They can't, and it helps with transitions too. They can't mentally think, what do I have to do to get from math now to English in 10 minutes? So I know it's 10 minutes because I can see on my analog clock and I've got the drawing and I know what to look for. How do I get myself from here to there? I'm watching that pass of time. I'm starting to feel anxious because I know English is coming up, but I don't know what to do with myself to get there. When you have this, and you've got the blocks showing all the steps to do. Okay, I lost my chalk. That is that's just so neat. Put it down and lose it. So you've got in your boxes up there, they don't have to be 3 steps, they could be however many steps that you need. You know, to get from math to English, I'm going to put my book away, and you can draw it or you can write it. Drawings are really powerful. Sometimes if you've explained the drawing to them, they just have to look at the drawing and it triggers what that means. Put my book away, I'm going to get out my math book, and I'm going to get my pencil sharpened or whatever it is that's next here. And you can draw it or write it or whatever. And that walks them through from one step to the other. It's actually really helpful for kids in terms of transitions. I do that when we're ending sessions sometimes, and it can be really good for them. We talked a little bit about this, creating the clear zones in the classroom. You know the color coding, different categories or storage bins and sections. Training them how to use each section. One of the things with the strategy wall, when you're teaching kids to use different strategies, and you've got a strategy wall, only put up the strategies that you've taught. So teach a strategy, then put it up. Teach a strategy, then put it up. Another good idea that I thought, this is all from this lady, and you should know this name, Sarah Ward. She's from, her name is on the Time Robbers thing, under the copyright thing. She's a speech and language pathologist from Boston, and she works with brain injured people. And most of the people she works with have brain injuries in the frontal lobe, which is your executive functioning. So she has developed a huge number of strategies and a huge amount of information on what executive functioning is, how it works, and just lists and lists and lists of strategies and how to deal with it. And a lot of the strategies I've shared with you come directly from her. And one of her ideas is creating a homework spot where you have your classroom organized according to category, and one of those categories would be a homework spot where they either hand in their homework, they check what homework they have, they might, and there's bins there. I don't know, I just thought it was a good idea. See what homework they need to take home. This classroom is supposed to be an example of a really well-organized classroom, but it's got stuff hanging from the ceiling. I'm not sure about the stuff hanging from the ceiling. When I see classrooms that have stuff hanging from the ceiling, it really throws me off. I find visually that's a little overwhelming for me, and I think the kids probably would find that a lot.
Oh, no, sorry.
But other than that, see, there's the personal goals. They've got, the cupboards are labeled with different things, so it's pretty, I don't know how you can see it, but it's pretty easy to see where things go. Another shot of the same classroom, nice and organized looking, with sections for things and things labeled. I mean, this one, visually speaking, to me, I like the color coding, I like the organization. The carpet, with all the rest of the color coding, the carpet looks a little busy to me. But, I don't know, I just pulled these off. Okay, let's go back to some of these behaviors briefly. I wanted to, so this one we actually did. This guy, this is my guy who destroyed the computer, blew up. He's a guy, he wasn't diagnosed, he might be diagnosed now, I'm not sure. We tried strategy on strategy on strategy with this guy. Super supportive family. We could not get this kid to get himself below a 3 in school, 3 on the 5-point scale. He was perpetually at a 3. We couldn't get him to come lower. We did social stories. Have you guys heard of social stories? Yes? No? Social stories are a strategy they use a lot in autism. They're usually really visual, and either they read them themselves or you read them to them depending on their level, and they can be with pictures, the language can vary. The purpose of social stories is to help it is not to direct the student, it's to help them to understand a situation that they don't understand and to tell them how other people deal with it. And it's meant to be very reassuring and comforting and positive. It's not directive, you don't use any negative language in it. It's a really useful tool. I've had a lot of success with it with a lot of kids. This guy, I think we probably did make progress with him. We tried and tried and tried. What do you do with a kid? You've tried all these strategies. We tried all the visuals. He had a visual schedule. He had visual supports. He had breaks. He had sensory room visits. He had everybody listen to him. He had reduced time in the class. We tried half days. We tried everything we could think of. Super supportive home. What did we do with him? What did we end up? Homeschooling. His parents pulled him out of school and they're homeschooling him. And guess what? He's doing fabulous. And as a result of them pulling him out of school and homeschooling, the whole family dynamic has come down. They were a super stressed out family. Christmases were a nightmare. They were beside themselves. And because they pulled him out of school, he's happy, the whole family's happy. Sometimes we don't have the answers. Sometimes we can't fix it. Now we've got another guy who does this sort of thing, but we can't fix it, but nor can he be homeschooled. The parents don't have the resources or the ability to have him homeschooled. What are we going to do with that guy? We're just going to have to cope with him as best we can until he gets old enough to go to the alternate school. That's pretty much what's going to happen. This guy is really a lucky guy because he has such a supportive family. But public school is sometimes so stressful for these kids. I think this kid is he might be diagnosed by now. They have their appointment coming up. And I suspect he's on the spectrum. But sometimes school is just not a good fit for them. And this guy was a really classic example of that. He would come into the door, into the school escalated. The social demands, the rules, everything changing the whole time. And to him, a change was a person wearing a different coat to school. That kind of thing could really impact him. And he's a super smart guy, super, super smart. And he processed language slowly, and he couldn't process the social cues, and he was always upset, and he was always in trouble. If that was your kid, wouldn't you pull him out of school? It came down to trying to make things easier for the family, and them making a decision that was going to make their life easier. Any questions? I'm ending soon, but it's 2 o'clock, and that's the time I have to let you go. So, any questions, quickly? No? Alrighty. Thank you very much for